Hello, cupcakes. Yeah, I got a shiner. I think I know why they call those dogs boxers. If you saw my last video, you'll know that we have all but adopted or been adopted by this adorable, completely adorable boxer puppy. I mean, she's a puppy, I'm pretty sure, but she's big. She's fully grown or close to fully grown. And man, she like wants to crawl into my lap, no, leap into my soul. Just like, wow. And she's pretty strong, and her claws are pretty sharp. So she loved me up some. She's truly adorable, but she is a hellion. Anyway, I think we've hit upon a name, but I don't want to jinx it because we haven't officially adopted her. So thanks to all of you who've suggested names, and if all goes well, I will reveal her name in a future video. Anyway, she's adorable. So shiner and all, I wanted to continue on my exploration with you of balancing energy through the tarot pulse, through this draw. It's a very simple kind of draw to do. Maybe it sounds a little confusing at first, and you kind of have to play with it perhaps to get the hang of it. But basically, you shuffle a deck, you go through the deck, and in search of four particular cards from the major arcana, cards that correspond to the classical four cardinal virtues, those four cardinal directions, as it were, of the well-examined life, the well-seasoned and regulated and evolved life. And those four cards are the Hermit, Strength, Justice, and Temperance. And actually, the order that you draw them is itself kind of interesting. Will give you a sense of what's the dominant and what's the dormant. So the first one you draw is the dominant virtue. The fourth one is more dormant. And then, after each card, you pull the nearest minor arcana card that corresponds with it. So what corresponds with the Hermit is Pentacles. What corresponds with Strength is Wands. What corresponds with Justice are the Swords. And what corresponds with Temperance are the Cups. And so as I'm going along, I hit upon the Hermit, and now I'm looking for the very next Pentacles. I hit upon Strength, and I'm looking for the very next Wands. I hit upon Justice, I'm looking for the very next Sword, and I hit upon Temperance, and I'm looking for the very next Cups. So you have to watch your deck as you flip over each card, and if you aren't as familiar with your deck, you may pass cards by. So it's actually a kind of draw that encourages bonding with a deck and also mindfulness of the imagery of the deck as you're flipping through it. So I was doing a, the series of readings that I was doing this week all corresponded with kind of an underlying theme of needing to surrender and trust. Sort of like getting more at ease with my own defensiveness, my own little Lisa that feels threatened. Like, how do I expand and open that up? And at first I thought that what I needed was more Wandsy energy, but actually as I got clearer on the theme of trust, it seemed that I needed to bring more Cups energy into my work with cards. And so I switched to my brand new Stella's Tarot. And I did something that I don't do, which is to try to work with a deck before I've gotten a bag for it. And actually the cards kind of rebelled. The very first card I drew from the deck, like the very first card, was the Devil, which should have warned me that I was being a little bit obsessed and addicted and kind of clinging to my brand new deck. And then I had a mishap. Another deck I've just recently acquired, which I'm going to end up working with and talking a lot about, but not until I get the bag for it, is Nora Huska's Gypsy Palace. And I decided to edge the deck red, which is beautiful. Turned out beautifully. But I had red Sharpie all over my hands, and then I started obsessively shuffling my Stella's Tarot and tinged the sides with red ink and then was horrified. Anyway, I salvaged the deck, and I'm very happy because I've already ordered a backup, which I wanted because it's such a beautiful deck and it's out of print, from Love Tarot Reading, that amazing Etsy dealer. She's so fabulous. I just can't say enough about her. And so I'd already ordered a backup, but I decided, you know, to edge that Stella's Tarot. This is turning out to be a long story. I'm sorry. I edged it in bronze. It looks beautiful, but now I've put it away to rest. You know, like resting like bread dough, you know, when you've like kneaded it and beaten it up and then you let it rest so it can rise. And so it's resting, and it's, you know, getting re-energized and loved up. And when its new bag arrives, all will be well. But in the meantime, I found myself drawn to a deck that I have not worked with since I got it, basically, which was, I think, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Anyway, the Crystal Tarot by Elizabeth Trevisan. Am I remembering her name correctly? Anyway, the Crystal Tarot. But that translation in English, you know, it could also be the Tarot of Glass. And, you know, the imagery was done in tempera paint, and it was meant to look like stained glass. And, you know, it is a freaking gloriously beautiful deck. One of those decks that you wish Lo Scarabeo would come out with in a large format, that they would reissue it. And I think there's a version of the 22 majors that came out first, and I think it's a larger format. I saw it and was conversing with a really wonderful eBayer about it, but I ended up not buying it. So let me show these again, and the light here sucks. So I did my Tarot Pulse with this deck. Strength is my favorite card in the deck, actually. So it's just beautiful. This is the order they came in when I pulled the virtues. I mean, look at that Temperance Angel. The colors in this light are not all that true. There's some great walkthroughs of the deck, so you can look at it online. And this is a vintage edition that has the wonderful, not reversible, but wonderful peacock image on the back. And although all of them have just obnoxious border with cards that are too small, this border is a little bit less obtrusive than what you see in more recent versions of the deck. Anyway, this is a deck that is loosely based in the minors on the Oeil de Picard system. I don't like that word. The lineage of Oeil de Picard for the minor. And what is, I think, most important about the Oeil de Picard system is the way in which it works with arrangement and number so beautifully and profoundly, cutting each card into an above and a below. So another deck that is a modern deck based on this lineage is the Tarot Balbi, or the El Gran Tarot, the Gran Tarot Esoterico. And in those decks, it's even clearer that you have a below and an above. So it's really thinking about the cards as being rectangles that have an upper half and a lower half. And in his manual of synthetic magic, what Oeil de Picard says is the minors are all about the way in which the celestial influences the terrestrial. So these cards are very much about that kind of occult principle of, you know, as above, so below, and that sense of emanation of what it means for the divine to come into the material world. So, what I got in my Tarot Pulse, I got the King of Wands, which if you've watched my other videos, you know that he's been stalking me this whole week. So I got the King of Wands, the Eight of Pentacles, the Nine of Cups, and the Knight of Swords. Now in this deck, the swords correspond with water, the cups correspond with air. There's much more to be said about that. That's also from the Jeu de Picard. And I'm not even going to go into that now. I just want to talk a little bit about this reading. And I haven't put it together in my head yet, but I wanted to use a deck that felt watery in the way that glass is watery, this sort of quasi solid. You know, they say glass is an amorphous solid. You know, if you look at the glass windows in old houses, they're thicker at the bottom than at the top because the glass settles. Even though it's a solid, it's also in motion. It's also fluid, right? And that sense of, well, I mean, isn't that like our life, right? You know, that things shift and change, but there's a fundamental way in which we sort of stay in the same shape, in the same, our lives stay in the same kind of pattern. How hard it is for things to really shift, but things do, they flow. But it's like in geologic time, we don't even notice the change that we undergo. And that quality of something that is fluid but is also solid, that quality seemed really important for me as I grapple with my energy and what it means for me to kind of work with the movement of my heart, what it means to work with the depths of my soul, all of this watery, the watery stuff of my relationality with others, my qualities of trust. How do I respect the slowness with which the human heart moves and changes, but also kind of open myself up to a more fluid soul? So this deck seemed somehow like the right deck. And I think what I'm seeing here in the middle cards, in the two pips, right, with the way in which, you know, at the center of the 8 is the pentagram, right, which is always kind of a figure of the human figure, right, the human self with head and 2 arms and 2 legs. Think about Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci. And, you know, it's an image that shows us the way in which this 5-pointed star, which is at the center, is also the 5, the stability of the 5 at the bottom, topped by this dynamic 3. Now, in Jeu de Picard's own reading of this card, he says, oh, this is about kind of material prosperity, and, you know, things are balanced and there's enough to go around, and it might also be about a pretty girl. It's that cartomancy kind of, like, you know, pretty girl, legacy, inheritance, that sort of thing. For me, what's important is actually in this deck, we don't have a symmetrical image. We instead have something that's a lot more like the resonance of the Chariot, where we have the kind of stability of the 4 and then the movement of the 3. And so it's like this image of change that's nonetheless stable. It's kind of like what I was saying about glass, you know, that there's a kind of solidity which is nonetheless fluid. And I see that here, and I also see it as centered in a very human way on the human form and the human figure. And it's something that, for me, this 8 is a kind of grounded vision of change and growth that's human-sized, growth that's not about forcing it, pushing ourselves, right? But is much more like, find your base, trust that you're moving forward. And then we just get the delightfulness of the 9. And this 9 of Cups, to me, seems really very much in keeping with the Rider-Waite 9, an image of kind of plenty and balance and satiety, having enough. You know, we've got 3, 3, and 3. The 3 at the top really feels to me like that celebratory 3 of Cups. But then we also have, like, you know, these 3 resting on the 3. So it just feels like it's celebration, 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 but also deeply anchored. Not, there's a way in which sometimes the 9s can feel sort of too self-oriented, you know, like if you think about in the Rider-Waite imagery, that self-satisfied kind of chubby man sitting there like, I've got everything I need. And there's something that's a little bit like, you know, maybe it isn't all about you. Maybe there's an outside world. There's a way in which it's too internal. And the 9s can feel like that sort of too inward-looking culmination. It's not really the culmination of the suite of 10. It's more sort of stuck at a kind of lower level, more focused on the self. But this to me feels like, instead of being that sort of self-focused, self-centered, it feels really deeply communal and joyous. So those are my middle cards, which seem very happy and very positive. And what they're flanked on either side is the King of Wands and the Knight of Swords. So the kind of force and vigor of this knight who moves so quickly. And I think there's a kind of mournful quality here in the sort of Eudes Piccard, where this knight is moving, you know, he's moving through water. He's slogging it out. It's very different from the Rider-Waite imagery of the Knight of Wands, who's like moving so quickly. But there's a kind of just incredible, I want to say chutzpah, like determination. You know, I'm going to drive my horse through the water. And then this very settled king with his foot resting on an equally settled lion. I just think these are two really powerful court figures. So I come away from this reading feeling very inspired and grounded and alive, feeling like there's plenty of time, that I don't have to worry, feeling very heartened. It feels like a very balanced reading for me. It feels like, like my work this week, with all of its kind of ups and downs, with my Stella's Tarot mishap. It feels like I've landed now, Friday night, in a pretty good place. So I think that's the end of this little series about balancing energy with tarot. And if you have questions about what I mean by balancing energy, or how to do the tarot pulse, don't hesitate to drop me a comment below. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And as always, thank you for your practice.